Hello, this is Sondra Oster Baras, bringing you a few words of Bible from the heart of Biblical Israel. This week's Torah portion is BeHa'alotcha, and I'd like to focus on chapter 10 and 11. Chapter 10 is actually one of the most exciting chapters that we see here in the book of Numbers. We see that they're getting ready to march to go into the land of Israel, and of course that march, that entry to the land of Israel, at the outset, based on the original plan, they were going to go now, walk to the land, enter it, and of course immediately set about conquering the land. So in chapter 10, when we have the following instruction, the Lord spoke to Moses saying, "Have 2 silver trumpets made, make them of hammered wood, etc." What is this for? This is when both are blown in long blasts, the whole community shall assemble before you at the entrance of the town meeting. And then we learned further, but when you sound short blast, the divisions encamped on the east shall move forward, and when you sound short blast the second time, those encamped on the south shall move forward. Basically, these are trumpets that are going to be used to signal the beginning of the march. But it also, when you are at war in your land against an aggressor who attacks you, you shall sound short blasts on the trumpets. These very same trumpets will be used when they enter the land of Israel to be the call to battle. Okay, now we are ready to move forward. We are ready to conquer this bit of land. And therefore, this whole idea of making the trumpets and using the trumpets right now to begin the march, to begin the entry into the land, is all tied up with what is supposed to happen very shortly, within the next week or two, the beginning of the conquest of the land of Israel. Okay, and so the chapter 10 continues with a number of different preparations, and they're about to go, and they actually start off at the end of chapter 10. They march from the mount of the Lord a distance of 3 days. They have the ark in front of them. They are ready to go. And then what happens? Chapter 11 happens. Okay, and this chapter begins with people who are complaining. There are a number of people in the camp, and they're not good for them. They begin to complain, and God is mad with them, mad at them, angry with them, and he sends a punishment and immediately destroys them. And this almost signals like what's going on here. We have very little information about this first incident, but indeed it is a turning point in the entire book of Numbers, because until this point, everything is on this upward path, and they're ready to go. Everything has been resolved, and now all of a sudden we start seeing problems. And of course, from this point on, we have a constant deterioration with a number of different issues that come up, different sins and different complaints that we see in the nation of Israel, culminating in the sin of the spies. They send the spies to prepare themselves to enter the land of Israel, and they come back with a bad report. The entire nation doesn't want to go to the land of Israel. And of course, at that point, God punishes them that they're going to stay in the land of Israel. And that's not the end of the problems. Problems continue throughout the book, but that seems to be really the climax of all of these issues. So let's look at chapter 11, because essentially this is where it all begins. And let's read now from verse 4. The riffraff in their midst felt a gluttonous craving, and then the Israelites wept and said, "If only we had meat to eat. We remember the fish that we used to eat free in Egypt, the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks and onions, and the garlic. Now our gullets are shriveled. There's nothing at all, nothing but this manna to look into." Okay, so they're very tired of having to eat the same manna every single day. And of course, this is something that makes God very, very angry. Now, we see similar complaints that the nation expressed earlier on, right after leaving Egypt in Exodus chapter 15 and 16. We see very similar complaints. They complained that they didn't have water, which actually was a very logical complaint. They didn't have water, and then God sweetens water so they can actually drink the water that is nearby them. And then they complain they don't have anything to eat. And even then, they also say, oh my goodness, and I'm now reading from Exodus 16, verse 3. The Israelites said, "If only we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by our flesh pots, when we ate our fill of bread." And then, of course, the response is that God brings them the manna. Okay, so then God understood that they were complaining and gave them what they needed. They needed water, he gave them water. They needed bread, he gave them bread. Here, it's a completely different situation. First of all, they are already more than a year since they left Egypt, or about a year since they left Egypt, and they have already spent a whole year literally living a miraculous existence, totally dependent on God. The manna comes down every day miraculously and gives them everything they need, and they have water wherever they go. And so today we're seeing a different kind of complaint. They're not complaining because they're hungry. They're complaining because they're tired of the manna. And of course, God is angry. But I think we can see something a little bit deeper in this as well. Both times, both in Exodus and here in Numbers, they're complaining at a time of transition. Then they had just left Egypt and they're about to enter the desert. Who knows what that desert will bring for them? And of course, they're very worried. And they're worried how we will survive in the desert. And God gives them answers. You will survive because God will provide for you. Now they are about to make another transition. They're going to be going away from that miraculous existence in the desert into a more normal, quote unquote, kind of life where they're going to have to conquer the land of Israel, settle there, grow crops, feed themselves. And here they're complaining again. And let's listen to what they're saying. They're tired of the bread. They're not hungry. They're tired of the bread. And then they say again that they remember fondly all the different foods that they ate in Egypt. How is it possible that a nation that is liberated from slavery and that has spent now an entire year being taken care of by God, how can today they want to go back to Egypt? It makes absolutely no sense. Unless you consider that perhaps it is exactly this sort of dependent existence that brings forward this complaint. Because until now, they have been living in the direct protection of God, and they have not had to take any responsibility. As they're about to enter the land of Israel, they're going to have to start taking responsibility for their lives, for their actions. They are going to have to conquer the land, and they're going to have to build a society. And maybe this generation that left slavery, that themselves grew up in slavery and have only spent a year of freedom, maybe this is still too difficult for them. And maybe, indeed, they look back in a positive way to a life of slavery, a life of dependence, a life where they didn't have to take responsibility and they didn't have to look after themselves. Of course, they're painting the whole slavery existence with quite rosy-colored glasses, but I think this is a lesson that we see here, and as this generation develops, this is a generation that is having trouble leaving slavery, leaving dependence. Have a wonderful Shabbat. Shabbat Shalom.
I hope you enjoyed that video, and we'd like to be sure you're getting all of our video content. So just click on the subscribe button below as well as on the notification bell, and that way you will have easy access to all our material. We look forward to staying in touch with you. God bless you, and have a wonderful day.